We're going to get started with our Birch and R in about 12 minutes. And so so I'm just getting things started here. If you're already tuned in, thanks for already joining us. And before we start, I'm just going to share this short video called Standing the Test of Time. It's one of my favorite videos that goes through the history of the John Birch Society.
True or false? Bananas grow on trees.
True!
True or false? Chameleons change their color to match their environments.
True!
True or false? The Great Wall of China can be seen from space.
True!
Houston, we have a problem.
Even though many believe these things to be true, experts have pointed out that these are simple misconceptions. Have you heard the saying, if you're told something enough times, you're sure to start believing it?
The same can be said for a person, company, or organization. For example, when the John Birch Society is mentioned, some respond in a negative way. If you ask why they feel that way, most can't explain. So why is this? In order to really understand, we need to go all the way back to when the society began.
A man named Robert Welch founded the John Birch Society in 1958.
Okay, if you're just joining us now, if we're going to get started here in about 10 minutes. If you're watching this live on Facebook right now or Twitter or YouTube, you can still sign up to be part of the webinar by going to birchandr.com. That's birchinr.com, birchandr.com, and signing up. You can actually see that link on your social media page if you're watching this video live on social media. If you are on social media, please take time to share this video. The video is being shared on my personal Facebook page, Evan Mulch. So if you go to EVANMULCH on Facebook, you can go to that Facebook video live streamed and share it. We should have a good crowd tonight. This is going to be a great event. We're very excited to have so many great guests, Dr. Graves and Dr. Wooll. And anyways, it's going to be a great night. So just hold tight. We will be started here in just a few minutes.
He believed the only way America could maintain its sovereignty and freedom was by promoting less government and more responsibility. He also believed that this would require exposing the socialists, communists, and other collectivists who always work for more government and less responsibility. In a speech given in 1961, Mr. Welch emphasized the importance of restoring the U.S. Constitution and avoiding democracy. His slogan was, "This is a republic, not a democracy. Let's keep it that way."
He truly believed that with God's help, these principles would help create a better world. His ideas quickly gained support and members, and with this growing momentum, the society began to attract national attention. Of course, not all of that attention was positive. In 1961, the Communist Party's West Coast newspaper, People's World, put out an article entitled, "Enter, from Stage Right, the John Birch Society."
Naturally, the communists portrayed the anti-communist John Birch Society as a dangerous organization created by the absolute boss, Welch, who was busily employing the cell method to create a following across the nation. They deliberately misled their readers by using the communist term cell instead of the actual term chapter, which is what the society calls a group of local members.
People's World even attacked Mr. Welch's critical view of democracy. However, they forgot to mention that he also maintained that our founding fathers gave us a republic, not a democracy. We do, after all, pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. Unfortunately, these false accusations would only be the first of many.
A short time after the article appeared in the communist newspaper, Time magazine issued its own article entitled The Americanist. It too gave the same destructive misinformation as People's World. Coincidence? Not likely.
So what was the purpose of all this?
The purpose was twofold. First, they wanted to stop more from joining the fight. Then they wanted to discredit and destroy Mr. Welch and the John Birch Society. So do you know what Mr. Welch decided to do?
Yeah, he confronted those false accusations with nothing more than the truth. In order to do so, he sent a telegram to California's governor requesting an investigation by the California Senate Fact-Finding Subcommittee on Un-American Activities. Once the request was accepted, the subcommittee set out immediately to conduct the investigation.
For 2 full years, the subcommittee pored over everything it was either given or could discover about the society. Investigators were sent to interview both JBS supporters and its critics. Agents attended chapter meetings, sometimes even secretly posing as people interested in membership. Finally, the subcommittee issued its report in 1963. It stated, "We believe that the reason the John Birch Society has attracted so many members is that it simply appeared to them to be the most effective, indeed the only organization through which they could join a national movement to learn the truth about the communist menace and then take some positive concerted action to prevent its spread. Our investigation and study was requested by the Society, which had been publicly charged with being a secret, fascist, subversive, un-American, anti-Semitic organization. We have not found any of these accusations to be supported by the evidence."
The California report revealed how completely false the media's accusations aimed at the society really were. But do you think that stopped the attacks?
Absolutely not. Instead, the attacks only increased. After that report was released, New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller responded with some insulting comments, referring to members of the society as extremists.
This wasn't Rockefeller's only attack. During the 1964 Republican National Convention, and with a large national TV audience watching, Nelson Rockefeller delivered a speech about extremism and stated,
"It is essential that this convention repudiate here and now any doctrine doctrinaire militant minority, whether communist, Ku Klux Klan, or Bircher."
Connecting a good name, like the John Birch Society, with negative groups is a common smear tactic. Because of this and all the other attacks, uninformed people began to believe what they were hearing.
What most Americans didn't realize was that the attacks on the society were being done out of fear.
That's right, the fear that Mr. Welch's new organization would grow large enough to actually stop and then reverse the socialist and communist plans. During the 1958 founding meeting of the John Birch Society, Mr. Welch discussed one of the communist plans, which involved the loss of our sovereignty to the United Nations. He then went on to list 10 communist goals for the United States. He restated these warnings in a speech in 1974.
A part of that plan, of course, is to induce the gradual surrender of American sovereignty, piece by piece and step by step, to various international organizations, of which the United Nations is the outstanding but far from the only example. Now, here are the aims for the United States. 1, greatly expanded government spending for every conceivable means of getting rid of ever larger sums of American money as wastefully as possible. 2, higher and then much higher taxes. 3, an increasingly unbalanced budget despite the higher taxes. 4, wild inflation of our currency. 5, government controls of prices, wages, and materials, supposedly to combat inflation. 6, greatly increased socialistic controls over every operation of our economy and every activity of our daily lives. This is to be accompanied, naturally and automatically, by a correspondingly huge increase in the size of our bureaucracy and in both the cost and reach of our domestic government. 7, far more centralization of power in Washington and the practical elimination of our state lines. There is a many-faceted drive at work to have our state lines eventually mean no more within the nation than our county lines do now within the states. 8, the steady advance of federal aid to and control over our educational system, leading to complete federalization of our public education. 9, a constant hammering into the American consciousness of the horror of modern warfare, the beauties and the absolute necessity of peace, peace always on communist terms, of course. And 10, the consequent willingness of the American people to allow the steps of appeasement by our government which amount to a piecemeal surrender of the rest of the free world and of the United States itself.
When we look back over the years since that speech, we can see just how real these predictions have become. If more Americans would have listened and helped back then, these threats could have been stopped. Good thing for us, more and more people are waking up and realizing the importance of what the founders gave us. We too can continue what Robert Welch started.
From the beginning, Robert Welch knew that in order to restore and preserve our freedoms under the Constitution, he would need to expose and stop the socialists, communists, and other collectivists. He also knew that in order for America to remain free and independent, patriots nationwide, we need to continue this fight for generations to come.
So, is the John Birch Society an organization that strives to protect our freedoms under the U.S. Constitution?
True.
That's right, because it has withstood the test of time. For many decades, the John Birch Society has been dedicated to restoring and preserving our freedoms.
With strong leadership, its members work at local, state, and federal levels to educate others on the proper role of government.
The John Birch Society stands tall in protecting American independence and freedoms for all future generations.
We hope that we've cleared the air on what many believe to be true about the John Birch Society.
We also hope that you would consider joining us in our efforts. We need your help now more than ever, because together,
we can make a difference.
All right, welcome everybody to this evening's webinar. We are excited to have with us our guests, and everybody can unmute themselves and turn on their cameras. And anyways, we will get started once everybody's unmuted. Let me do that real quick.
I found it.
All right. Very good, very good. Okay. We have about 27 people on the webinar right now. We have a lot of people watching on Facebook. And the topic this evening is, I'll let you, Janice, talk about the topic and introduce our speakers. And I would like to start this event with a prayer. And so would any of our panelists like to volunteer to start the prayer for tonight?
Sure.
If not, would you like to? Okay, go ahead.
Father God, we just come before you humbly, before your throne. And we thank you that we can do so through the name and the blood of Jesus. And Father God, you know the situation in our country right now. You have seen this and you continue to see it. But Father God, you are the only one that can truly make the difference. You are the only one. Father, we are your hands, your feet, and your mouth, but you are our guidance. Be with us, Father. Give us your wisdom. Give us your strength. And may we set our face as flint towards you, looking not to the left nor to the right, but to you as our sole help in time of trouble. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen, amen.
Amen. Okay, Evan, I guess I'll get started here so we don't delay. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Carla Dean Graves and Dr. Vicki Wool. And I met these two great ladies when I worked for another organization and I did grassroots advocacy. And I was able to lobby with them to a certain extent in Washington, D.C., and help them advance some of their initiatives in restoring the physician-patient relationship and free market health care. Not what we have with Obamacare, but really free market health care. And Dr. Carla Dean Graves, she facilitates a group of physicians and practitioners and even people in the health insurance industry all across the country. There are approximately 35,000 physicians who participate in this, and one of those organizations actually is the AAPS, which was started by a John Bircher, Dr. Larry McDonald, who at one time was the president of the JBS. He's a Georgia congressman and a great patriot. So it's just amazing to see how the patriots all stick together. Dr. Carla Dean is licensed in family medicine in Missouri, in the Kansas City area. And she has been lobbying the White House on issues of healthcare policy and things involving this COVID-19 novel virus that we have directly, in front of them. And the same thing for Dr. Vicki Wooll. They both have the same activities and passions. And I will tell you this, that the physicians I've been involved with, they do this because they really care. These are people that want to see you get good health care, and they know what good looks like. And I think some of you know what good looks like because we haven't had it for a while. They do these activities at their own expense. They are really, truly sacrificing individuals. Dr. Carla Dean Graves, she also is a regular guest and co-host, I think, somewhat with Dr. Jerome Corsi. You probably have heard of him. And she has interviewed quite a few very important people to expose what's going on with this virus. Dr. Vicki Wooll, she has, besides having an MD, she also has a master's in public health and epidemiology and had worked toward actually a PhD in that at one time. But, she ended up coming back to the United States. She might expound a little bit about her experience being in Venezuela as the country was being overtaken by the communists. They call them socialists, but we all know that they're really communist. And Dr. Vicki Wooll, she practices in the Idaho area. And she's gotten kind of a lot of awards because she's such a great doctor. She had an award for excellence in family practice and maintained her national certification from the American Board of Family Medicine. And I think the importance of having these two physicians on tonight is our main goal here is to bust the myths that we have heard from television or from the articles that we're reading, because oftentimes we don't know what the political motivations are of the individuals who are writing those articles. I can tell you that these ladies will tell you the truth about how to treat this virus. And we're going to identify what the true risk to each person is for this virus, how we need to boost our immune system, how we need to combat this. And there's a very inexpensive treatment out there why is it that Fauci and Hahn from the FDA and the CDC and our state health departments, why are they stopping us? So I want to open this up, and I think maybe should we go with you, Carla Dean, and you can talk a little bit about what you've been doing in terms of talking to the White House and why you think hydroxychloroquine is so important.
I tell you what, why don't we start with Vicki and let her and kind of give her a history and let her give a history of this virus and where it started, and and then we'll attack it.
Okay, sounds good to me. Okay, Vicki Wooll.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Carla Dean. So what we know from the virus is that it did originate in a lab somewhere over in China in the Wuhan area. How it actually got there and who is actually putting it all together remains to be seen. Whether or not it was deliberately let out or accidentally let out remains to be seen. So what we do know is that it's fairly infectious, and there are different ways that it can be transmitted. Droplet is what everybody has been told. There, to a lesser degree, people have been told that there's actually spread through fecal material, which has an important role when you go into public bathrooms and the toilets flush automatically and spread those droplets up into the air, as well as the the hand dryers that you've got water droplets on and those spread up into the air. I think there's a good chance that there's probably respiratory spread as well due to the infectivity. Part of the way that we know where it is in the community or in the United States is through testing, and the testing that we've had available has really been promoted by the CDC to be the nasal swab. But we know that that's really limited, and it's kind of screwy, to be honest with you. If you really want to know what the disease burden is in a society in the United States, you have to do blood tests. And those blood tests have been restricted to a great part by the CDC initially, because my understanding is that Fauci and the CDC actually held the patents to not only the coronavirus, but as well as the testing capability of that. That is what I've heard from some sources from lawyers. But now that we do have testing out, I can tell you that there was a study at Stanford in California that really said the prevalence or the disease burden, which are how many cases in the population, is really pretty high. There have been some recent studies within Idaho where it's shown that out of about 4,700 patients that were tested, randomly screened, 5.5% already had antibodies. So that's really pretty high. And if you looked at healthcare workers, 8% already had antibodies. And so when we are dealing with an infectious virus, we really kind of want the community to have what you've heard on the news, meaning I'm just spacing on the word, an immunity, a herd immunity, if you will, so that there isn't any rampant spreading of it, of about 80%. Those are what some of the models say. So we're already at about 8% for healthcare workers just in our little state of Idaho. I think it's much higher. It came out much higher in California. And then we know that there are some hot spots such as New York, New Jersey, Florida, Louisiana, that there's a little bit higher transmission. So I can get into some of the pathology if you want, Jan. I don't know where you'd like to go.
Sorry about that. I had to unmute. Yeah, that could be interesting, but really quick, as you're talking about the statistics, there is somebody that just asked a question about, is the death count being exaggerated and why?
Well, I can tell you, yes, I can tell you, yes. So the whole thing about statistics, what I want you to start asking questions. I want you to, we all want you to start really kind of understanding what the whole thing is. So let me go back to Idaho again. So I'm going to tell you that in Idaho, we officially have about 2,100 cases, okay? 2,100 cases. And the death, we've had 64 deaths as of a couple days ago. So every death is important, and I'm not trying to minimize it. It really is, serious. But if you look at that death rate, and for a death rate, you do 64 divided by 2,100 cases, that gives you a case fatality rate. That kind of gives you an idea of how serious the disease is. Like when I was going through epidemiology, yellow fever, for example, had a case fatality rate of 50%. My gosh, that means 1 out of every 2 people die. So now we're looking at 64 people have died out of 2,100, and that kind of puts the case fatality rate at 3%. We know that influenza is about 1%. So we're like, I'm sorry, 0.1%, right? Wasn't it, Caroline, 0.1? 0.1%?
Yes.
So it would be like 30% higher, right? And we would go, oh my gosh, that is really serious. But no, because we now have prevalence data. We know from a random population that the prevalence is actually 5%. So if you multiply our population by 5%, which is how common it is, we get about 93,000 cases. That means 93,000 people out of the population of Idaho have antibodies already to the coronavirus. And if you take that 64 people that have died, and now you divide it by 93,000 instead of 2,100, that number doesn't even reach 0.006. It's really, really very small. So it helps you put into perspective why the numbers matter and what you're looking at. So if you just look at the numbers dead, it's not good. So you have to look at it through a population.
That's excellent. And I think you somewhat, said that obviously it could be exaggerated because we don't know what numbers to look at. We're not trained in that. We're just listening to the people that are feeding us on a daily basis. And go ahead.
And you're right. I didn't answer the second part of that question. So people have been instructed that even if you don't have a positive nasal swab, if they're in the hospital and dying of pneumonia, they are attributing it to coronavirus. So, and that definitely skews the statistics to more deaths, right? Well, we know every year that people die of pneumonia. We know people die of heart attacks. We know people die of cancer. So when you see those statistics change and all of a sudden for a given area or a hospital, there really aren't any heart attacks, there aren't any cancer cases, there really, all the pneumonia cases are called COVID. Well, we're getting a little bit of skewed data because the same number of people typically die. So that's the question to ask. We need a retrospective study to go back into those hospitals to review some charts and actually say, what is the true percentage of people that have actually died from coronavirus? But you know what? People don't have to die from coronavirus to the great extent. And Carla Dean, feel free to comment.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to say something about the PCR also, because it's a polymerized chain reaction test. And we have to realize that when we have this test, actually after about 11 days, our upper airway clears that virus. And that virus decides that it wants to live someplace else. And sometimes that's down into the lungs, and sometimes that's down into the the gastrointestinal as well. And we have these little things called ACE2s, and that, of course, the virus is attracted to those. But we know that that PCR test is about 30% false negatives. We also know that the PCR test that they first came out with put us behind. It delayed actually treatment. And it delayed it for several weeks. And then we know that after they put the test out, that is they, meaning the CDC, they put it out mainly in those areas like Washington State and California. And those, unfortunately, were giving erroneous results. And most of those had to be recalled. And so that put us another week or two behind. So actually, the CDC has mishandled the coronavirus episode ever since, even before it came to our shores, because they knew it was going to be coming because of intelligence that actually told them back in November. But everybody was too busy impeaching a president to pay any attention. They were more concerned about Trump than they were a coronavirus. And then when we did finally have it hit the shore, then unfortunately, we were way behind the rest of the world. Consequently, I think that more people were more severely ill and died who would not probably had to have. Now, let's move on to the treatment. And you would think that I was going to tell you about heroin or cocaine. And that I'm telling you something that's extremely dangerous, just horrible. And I would be absolutely someone that's probably one of these way far out doctors just to even tell you about this. But I'm going to anyway. And the name of it is hydroxychloroquine. Oh my gosh. If you want to get a pharmacist to jump over the counter at your prescription, take in a hydroxychloroquine, because they're going to look at you like you just came off of the planet Mars. No, hydroxychloroquine was first discovered in 1934. Actually, it was chloroquine. And then later on came hydroxychloroquine, because we wanted something that was a little bit less toxic from the standpoint of there's some side effects, and there probably are more bad dreams with chloroquine and so on and so forth. And you hear about the AMA, the American Medical Association, and the CDC and the FDA. Oh my gosh, you take this medication and you could have a prolonged QT interval. Well, my goodness, it sounds like you take one of those tablets and just keel over dead right then and there. That's not the case. There are some people who have a genetically condition that does predispose them to a problem with the QT interval. In other words, a heart block. That's basically what it amounts to. We can talk about these QT intervals and people have no idea what you're talking about. Well, it's like a heart block. And so, yes, it can produce something of that nature, but they're very, very rare. In fact, for years, the rheumatologist and the Lupus Foundation, they have used hydroxychloroquine for lupus and for things like rheumatoid arthritis. And have they been proven? Have they gone through testing for that? No. It was tested and it was approved for malaria and the prevention of malaria. Every troop that goes over from our country goes over to a malaria state, they have hydroxychloroquine, and God forbid they haven't had an EKG prior to going. And God forbid, I don't think we've had one death from hydroxychloroquine in all of the military for many, many years that we have sent our men and women overseas. Now, hydroxychloroquine is safe, it's efficient, but there's a little secret that everybody needs to know about hydroxychloroquine. It's cheap. That's why many in our government do not want to have hydroxychloroquine actually as the treatment, because what they want to do is they want to put out more expensive medications that will cost us and our government a great deal more of money. A remdesivir you have to give in the hospital. It's an anti-HIV medication. It's expensive. It's also given in the latter portion and part of the COVID-19. And also the Chinese have done a study showing that by itself, it is not effective. Now, I want you to hear that. It is not effective, because Fauci came out and said, oh, this is going to be the state of the art. This is wonderful. This is great. And he had a study. This study hasn't even been printed yet. And yet he is calling it something that we really should be doing. And do you know what he did with that study? Ladies and gentlemen, he ran that study as remdesivir 5 milligram or for 5 days. And then he ran the remdesivir for 10 days and called it a study. That's not a study. That's a comparison of the same drug, only on different days. And hydroxychloroquine has been in our country and safe, efficient, and then that doggone word called cheap. It's cheap, but it's effective. And we have found that it actually is what doesn't kill the virus, but it stops the virus. And how does it do that, Dr. Wooll?
Hydroxychloroquine will stop the virus from getting into the lung cells and probably other cells as well. If the virus manages to get it, oh, first of all, let me explain what a virus is. And I'm sorry if you don't know, but it's not an independent organism. A virus is a parasite, and the virus has to get into a cell from its host and use its host machinery to reproduce itself. And in such, usually destroys the host cell. So coronaviruses are noted in all kinds of animals and to an extent in human beings. You get exposed to it, the virus goes to the lung cell, the virus goes into the lung cell, which is what hydroxychloroquine blocks. If it does get into the cell, together along with zinc, which is why zinc is so important, it stops the viral replication, meaning it stops it from being produced. So you may still have the virus on board, and your body then, if you've got the hydroxychloroquine on board, recognizes the foreign agent and is able to create your own defense team in terms of in terms of antibodies to fight it. So you actually develop a healthier response with the hydroxychloroquine on board. The reason that people, are so scared of this virus is because if you ignore that, more and more virus attacks more and more cells, and the viral load gets really high. When it gets high enough in your lungs, it triggers this thing that's called the cytokine storm. And it's a chemical warfare that's going on inside the lungs, and it does a bunch of damage. And you get things like little tiny blood clots, and you get all kinds of debris in the lungs, and you have trouble breathing, and your lungs get stiff. And so people early on were going, oh my gosh, we need to put them on a ventilator. And that was a whole big cry because we need to help them breathe. When in fact, this is an immunological reaction of the host. This is the body fighting the virus, which is what's causing all the problem. And that's why if you leave that hydroxychloroquine till when somebody is so sick that they can't breathe, that they go to the hospital, and then they're put in there and then they're given the hydroxychloroquine, well, it's just about too late. You're trying to get the virus not into the cells, not when it's all ramped up and you've got the cytokine storm going on. So that's why, and even so, people get better on hydroxychloroquine even if they're in the hospital. And so they're, like Dr. Carla Dean was talking about, there's some real sham studies out there that really aren't studies. Like that VA study, it's not a study, it was a survey. And did you know that in their arm where they tried to show that there was not improvement, they actually used hydroxychloroquine first in patients, and then they did the remdesivir. So you have to look closely at how they design the studies and what they leave out.
So they didn't tell the rest of us in the country about that. They just blasted that out to make it appear that hydroxychloroquine was not effective. And that's pretty much the study that they keep shoving down all our throats. But hopefully the people that are on this call tonight are going to take that information and they're going to disseminate that among all their friends and relatives and say, no, we need to take a better look at this. So
I want to make a comment on what Vicki said, Jan.
Sure.
I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to anyway. Viruses are parasites. They have to have something living and making a living for them, okay? So I equate them to bureaucrats.
I think that's a good point. And so to that point, I'd like to say that we have those bureaucrats controlling our healthcare now, right? They're telling physicians what drugs they're allowed to dispel. That's not legal, is it? Have you ever had any pharmacy tell you you cannot prescribe that drug? off label, because you do that on a regular basis on drugs, correct? We don't know what's going to work. This is a quote unquote novel, brand new virus, as they say. So of course we do not have anything already proven, other than the fact it's part of this virus is a SARS component. And back in 2005, Dr. Fauci said, I'm so glad we have hydroxychloroquine to be able to treat this SARS virus. And didn't you tell me, Dr. Carla Dean, that he did the same thing, what, in 2013?
2013, he did that with MERS.
Right.
And yes, he did do that. And he didn't have any studies to show
Okay.
that it was, I mean, he didn't study that for 6 months and do a double-blind study.
Right.
He knew that it worked. Dr. Fauci worked with hydroxychloroquine clear back in the 80s when he was researching the HIV. We also have to see something that Dr. Fauci is associated with that I think is important, and that's this virus. And this virus has an HIV-1 component to it, and it is called a glycoprotein 120. And what in the world is that? Well, glyco is sugar and protein is protein and something that we build with. It's a building block. So what in the world does Dr. Fauci want with this glycoprotein 120 that's actually we see in the HIV-1 particularly? Well, he has 4 patents on that. And he also, it has been noted by scientists that the COVID-19 virus, or SARS-CoV-2, actually has 4 components placed into it. It looks like they've been placed of the glycoprotein 120 is in that virus. And it's the only coronavirus that has such within it. And so it appears from all what that has many scientists have looked at, that this virus did not happen in nature. This doesn't normally happen in nature, but it has been something that maybe have been engineered rather. And for what reason? And here we have something that has, the last that I had heard was earlier this week, and I stand to be corrected, but I had been told that we had about 37,000 deaths actually from COVID-19. Now let's go back to 2017 and 2018, the flu season. We had between 60 and 61,000 who we lost, unfortunately. Now, don't get me wrong. Every death, that was someone's loved one. That was a loss. And as far as I'm concerned, many of these people who are very sick or who have died, they've died needlessly. Because we have something, the hydroxychloroquine, the azithromycin, the zinc. And by the way, I want to really get into this before we go any further. People need to build their immune systems. And they need to build their immune systems with vitamin D. In fact, we have one of our physicians that has said, I've heard him say many times in our group, that no one who has a normal vitamin D level goes on a ventilator. And that coming out of the winter, we need that vitamin D. And you should really get a vitamin D level to know what your level is. We would like to have it around 50 if we could. And so your vitamin D3 is something that is absorbed better. And you need probably some zinc, maybe like 25 milligrams. And you need vitamin C. You need about 1,000 to 2,000. Now, everybody's different. And if you have a family doctor, I suggest that you go to your family doctor and ask. But the vitamin D should be maybe 2,000 to 5,000 international units, at least, depending upon what your level is. And then that level needs to be followed, because vitamin D can become toxic if you overdo it. So don't think, well, gosh, I think this week I'll make up for lost time, and you take 5 tablets of 5,000. No, please. Do it smart, and do it correctly, and do it with the guidance of your family doctor.
Okay, that's good advice, and it's good information. Dr. Vicki Wooll, do you have anything else to add? I know that you have yourself treated patients, and do you want to share some of your experiences?
I have, thank you, Jan. I'd like to kind of just backtrack for one thing. We have some international death rates, which I think would be really interesting for you to know. India, Costa Rica, Australia, South Korea, and Brazil all give hydroxychloroquine for early treatment, that what we're talking about, but they also do prophylaxis. And prophylaxis would be like a high-risk patient. And we know from the statistics that pretty much anybody under 60 doesn't really have any problems with the coronavirus. There are always exceptions, right? Immunocompromised and super sick and super high risk. But in general, if you're under 55, you're not going to really you're going to recover from it probably just fine, unless you're sick anyway. Now, over that's where the higher risk comes out. So what India and some of these other countries that I just mentioned, they're doing is they're giving hydroxychloroquine prophylactically, meaning that in India, for example, of their 1.3 or 1.4 billion people, every single healthcare worker is on hydroxychloroquine. We're not talking a lot of pills. Our protocol in the United States, we've suggested, is 1 pill a week. This is not a lot. India is actually a little bit higher. They're doing 1 pill twice a day for 5 days, which would be 200 milligrams. But if you look at how many cases they've had, at this time they had like almost 28,000 cases, and their death rate, meaning how many people died per million, was 0.6. So 0.6 people died per million in India. And Costa Rica, Australia, South Korea, they have similar amounts. In the United States, because we do not allow it prophylactically, in a lot of different states, it is prohibited to give even early. You've heard about the governors that are making these unilateral decisions through the State Board of Pharmacies and saying, no, you cannot give hydroxychloroquine only if they're hospitalized. And I already just told you why you don't want to give it when they're hospitalized. You want to have it on board early, and you want to have it in your high-risk groups, family members and people that are maybe older folks, and as well as healthcare workers. So I just got done. India, 0.6 per million. The United States, 167 per million. My goodness gracious. It's incredibly high. Now that article came out of the AAPS online. So the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, you can find a nice little chart that shows the death rates, the mortality rates on that. And then the second part of the question, Jan, that you just asked me was going?
Well, your experience as in treating your patients and what you have seen. Because people don't get a chance to hear this from the physicians who are really working in the field. They're just listening to some of these docs who are really non-clinicians.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. So yes, me and some of my colleagues, there was a 67-year-old smoker, had a horrible cough. He was short of breath. He wouldn't come back from California. We got it in California, came back to the clinic, probably should have been hospitalized, put on hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and azithromycin, turned on a dime. turned on a dime. A smoker, 67, right? We've got another one that was an asthmatic female, really bad asthma, pneumonia, should have been hospitalized. She just said, no, 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 I can't. She was having trouble saying 3 words in a line. I mean, she couldn't even get their breath out. Put on the hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and zinc, turned on a dime. By 24 hours, she wasn't 100% better, but she had continued to get better. So there are so many cases and stories like this, even worldwide. Dr. Carla Dean and I were on a call with Brazilian researchers. They're having the same success. Brazil is using preventative and early treatment. So there are so many anecdotal stories. There's a physician in Texas that treated his, older folks home.
Nursing home.
Nursing home?
Yeah, nursing home. I'm sorry. He treated all of them with hydroxychloroquine at a low dose, and nobody died. Nobody had to be hospitalized. So this works. These aren't anecdotal. That's what you're going to hear. This is all anecdotal information. No, it's not. Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, I don't know how many patients he's done. Last I heard it was 1,500. But he's kept people out of the hospital. He's kept them off fence. He's kept them, better, getting better. And so there's a lot of information that's going out there, and there's an awful lot of disinformation because, like Dr. Carla Dean said, it doesn't pay much. And the patents are already worn off of it.
So Vicki and Carla Dean, I keep hearing that, and I read this and I hear it. They say there's really no proof this works. So you guys have right now disproved that statement because nobody's listening to the physicians who are treating people. And by the way, how many, often one out of 5 drugs that you might use off patent because you recognize that it could have value and benefit. And I recall that Donald Trump did sign a law that said that dare to try, that I don't understand why we can't apply that law to using hydroxychloroquine and the stopping of it. But there is a study that was done, Raoul Didier, the French doctor, he did some studies, and even Dr. Zelenko, he's taken his information and they're using that, are they not?
Yes, they are. They are using that information. In fact, Dr. Zelenko just was approved last Friday for a large FDA study, as well as today he was accepted in one of the large infectious disease journals as a presenting author. And so his studies have really been validated. I think that what really concerns me is that I'm seeing more and more physicians that are very hesitant in ordering the hydroxychloroquine. They want to fall in line with the FDA and the CDC and the AMA, and they don't want to go outside of those boundaries. But we have to have caution with that, because the caution is that if you do it with hydroxychloroquine, what's next? In fact, Dr. Wooll has something on that that I'd like for her to share, because there's going to be other medications that we are going to be told the very same thing. Where does it end? They see now that they can get away with this. Well, if this is the precedence that we are setting ourselves up for a very sorry precedence later on down the way. Please.
So essentially, Dr. Carla Dean, the bureaucrats in these ivory towers that are non-clinicians, they don't treat patients, they really don't see people at all. They are making the determination on what you are allowed to prescribe or not prescribe. And obviously there is a political motive here, considering that we've already established, Dr. Fauci had praised hydroxychloroquine in 2005 for SARS, 2013 for MERS. He's worked with it with AIDS patients, so he's very familiar. And it is very common for physicians to prescribe medications for those conditions that were not necessarily tested. And as you pointed out, that this drug, physicians started to utilize the drug for lupus and rheumatoid arthritis patients without doing any further studies. And they had nobody saying, oh, heavens no, somebody could fall over dead from a heart block. Well, that's not a big deal. I will tell you, I'm a former coronary care unit nurse, and the heart block that you would get would be not a big deal. But if this drug, as Dr. Wooll has established for everybody, has turned people on a dime, and she's not the only physician I've heard say that. On television, Dr. Mark Siegel from Fox News said, he prescribed for his 96-year-old father hydroxychloroquine, and his dad was getting so bad he thought he was going to have to hospitalize him, and within less than 10 hours he had turned around, and that was a 96-year-old. So the key to success with every disease or every condition is to identify it, treat early, and avoid all hospitalization. And unfortunately, what I've seen, and you have too as clinicians, that the complete opposite of what is the gold standard in healthcare has been totally thrown out the window by the bureaucrats. I want everybody to understand this is exactly what happens in socialized medicine and a dictatorial government, which I'm sure that Dr. Vicki Wooll could share a little bit about that, because she had experience with that in Venezuela. But I think this is a clear-cut example of why we don't want to continue on this way, why we don't want our public health departments at the state level to dictate care and treatment of patients also, and decide how they're going to go about shutting us down. So Dr. Wooll, would you like to say a few things about your experience with socialized medicine?
Thank you, Jan. And I know you want some time for questions, so I'll make my comments pretty brief. This is about a virus a little bit, but moreover, it's about a whole lot more. And so I spent 10 years in Venezuela. I went to medical school there, didn't go there with the intention of going to medical school, but I did in Spanish, and then proceeded to really live the communistic takeover of Venezuela. So let me throw some ideas out there for what I experienced, for what you can keep an eye on, and then you can start to question what's actually happening. So the government actually created their own uprising and dissidents that would riot. I don't know where they came from, but they were around. And so people saw that, and there was just anger and hostility about the government. So these things came up, and so it polarizes people. When the economic situation got worse and worse and worse, then people came in saying, well, we need to throw over this government. This government is bad. And people were saying, yes, we do. And so then there was a coup, and that was Chavez. And I was actually working in a hospital during that time period, still a medical student though. So after the coup, we immediately went into martial law, and we couldn't be out before 7 in the morning. It could have been 6. I don't remember, it was 6 or 7 in the morning, but we couldn't be out at night after 7 o'clock at night. We had all the banks closed. You could not get money out of a bank. So it didn't matter. I mean, maybe if they gave you anything when they did open up with really restricted hours, you could only get a little bit out. The food, what you had was food that you kind of lived on. And there are a lot of families, extended families. The other thing, they started limiting, they had power outages. So what happens when you lose electricity? Well, everything in your refrigerator and freezer goes, if you had anything in your refrigerator or freezer, and then they would turn it back on again. But try to run a hospital without electricity. You don't run a vent, you don't run a nebulizer machine, you don't have the lights. then they would also ration water. And so water would be turned on and off, and it would go off for days at a time. So you had big trash tubs of water that you washed your hands with, took a bucket, and then you dumped it down the toilet. So there are different ways that you can be attacked, and this is exactly what happened. Besides that, we hit double-digit inflation. So the inflation was crazy, and I'm telling you, that's where we're going for. They've already created food chain breakage, and so we are going to experience some of that. And what's going to happen is we'll have shortages, and then the prices are going to increase. And then they're going to go, oh, well, they're increasing too fast. We're going to have to do some price control. So whenever the government gets in and starts doing price control, then you go, whoa, they got a little bit too much power. Last year, actually, in Colorado, they tried to price control the price of insulin because it was like $400 a vial. Well, you don't want to do price controls. You want to go back to what is the reason it's so expensive? Well, it's the greedy pharmacy benefit managers and group purchasing organizations. It's the whole manipulation of the market. So then the double-digit inflation, the restriction. We used to have 2 tiers of medicine where you could go private and you could go public. The public was government run, but the people, when the middle class got less and less and less and less, and then there were a small group of very powerful people, rich, and then the rest of them were at poverty level. There's no middle class to subsidize or to help, an independent medical system. And so it all kind of went to the government run one. I mean, we had to wash our gloves and autoclave them. There weren't supplies. My girlfriend was a pediatrician there, and she finally left when there wasn't any way to nebulize kids. There's no medication. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on in terms of how it is. And now you can't even get out of the country because the airplanes don't have, our airlines don't have enough money to subsidize them because the country keeps going broke and doesn't pay them. So it's like they're trapped. I mean, they're trapped in that whole system. And when I got back here 24 years ago, I looked around, and besides crying in a grocery store, which is what I did because I could not believe what variety and diversity there was. It was like amazing, and then I went, oh my gosh, the United States has 20 years. And I got into politics, and I got into medical politics, and that's what I've been fighting for as they try to destroy medicine. Because when they take over medicine, let me tell you, it's just when they socialize medicine, it's just a stone's throw away from taking away your guns, which is what they did in Venezuela. The crime started to go crazy. The other thing I want to point out is they let prisoners out. Okay, after Chavez got into power, they let prisoners out. And what they did was the government could take over your house. They could take over your business. They could take over your bank accounts. They could take over your property. And what they did was they took people out of neighborhoods and put the thieves and the felons in those neighborhoods. And so in your middle class, in your upper class neighborhoods, all of a sudden you had your next door neighbor was a felon. And so more rape, more robberies, more crime, and it destroyed, and that was all social equality, okay? And that's where they're going with some of this stuff as it just disintegrates, and it's happening in California. There are people in California right now that have squatters on their yards, defecating in their yards, and they can't get rid of them. So anyway.
Yeah, I think that's important information for everybody to hear, because as we watch this unfold, and that is, as I go back to the main reason why we're doing this to bust the myth of this. This is really not a pandemic, and it's not doesn't have the I would say potency of what they anticipated in terms of a death rate. Initially, Trump was told 2.2 million, and then a week ago we had 59,000 people. Now we have 37. So they keep readjusting. They're getting funny with the numbers. And so we, the people, not sure what to believe, but we do believe the physicians that are taking care of us and that really care about us. Now, I've got some questions here, and boy, oh boy, people are one of the biggest things. So if I look at this.
And Jen, do you mind if I say something real quick?
Sure.
Because we have a short amount of time. I'm willing to go longer if we want to go longer. We have about 8 minutes left. It's up to all of you. I'm up for it if you're up for it. I do want to thank the donors. Jonelle Rains, $20. Randall West, $20. Tia Thompson, $100. Joseph Adonisio, $100. Bernadette Val, $25. And I'm waving my flag because this is how we spread Americanism. We fund Americanism, and that's what we need to do as Americans, is do our best to fund the American cause. And all these funds are going to the John Birch Society to help fund field coordinators like me. I thank you so much for making donations already. Joseph Searing, $25. Brian Hooper, $100. Marilyn Held, $50. Edward Handline, $10. Jan Barton, $50. Liz Nickum, $25. David Evans, $50. And Gregory Hamilton, $30. Thank you so much for being Birch&R boosters. You're the ones that are helping to make this happen. We do these 2 times a week, and I didn't want to get in the way, but we did promise in the email that we would recognize our donors, and we had a goal of $500 raised for the John Birch Society. We are at $610. So thanks so much, everybody.
Ooh, hey.
And also thanks to Jan, because she did everything to make this happen.
Oh no, listen, these ladies, I give them all the credit, because we're going to hopefully do this in other parts of the country with the John Birch people, because without people who really understand and are willing to get activated, contacting your elected representatives face to face, on Twitter, on making phone calls, telling your people in the neighborhood, we need to stand for our constitutional rights. And it's the people in this organization that have done that already. But I want to get back to, well, the main purposes here is to bust this. This is not a virus that we need to be really afraid of, right, ladies? I mean, it's not going to creep up and we're all going to die, because that didn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is because if we take care of our immune systems, then we can fight this off. But if you're at risk, if you're a cancer patient or you have some underlying conditions, some Lyme disease and stuff, you're at risk. And actually, those people are more in line to get preventive hydroxychloroquine and zinc. That makes perfect sense. So I have a number of questions regarding hydroxychloroquine and zinc, but also the question of, do we want to wear a mask? Do we want to wear a mask everywhere we go? And how that affects our oxygenation in our lungs? And what is the real purpose of wearing a mask, and where's the science? So I'd like to know, where's the science behind wearing a mask? Where's the science behind 6 feet apart? What's going on, ladies? Where's that science? And maybe we all need to be asking those questions. Does anybody have an answer? Do either one of you have an answer on that one?
Dr. Wolf?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Carlene.
I think that at the very beginning, especially those that were directly exposed, that a mask probably was the thing that we should have been doing. It was on mask, off mask. It was, nobody could make up their mind. I think that we're at a point where we need to have some exposure. And I don't think that the mask at this point are really of that much value. Now, Dr. Wooll may disagree, so go ahead.
I agree with you that, you know, this has been a circus from the beginning. It was, you don't use a mask, you can't use a mask, you're gonna hurt yourself if you use a mask. And then it's like, do a mask. And now you can't get into some places without a mask. You know, does it help? Let me ask you this. Why do we use a mask when we do surgeries or procedures? You know what? I mean, there are indications for it, but when you're doing the general population, and if somebody is sick, you actually can have very low, I just got done telling you that there were so many extra cases of people that actually have this virus, and you put a mask on them, and if they've got any kind of a lung condition, even if they don't know that they've got it, they really could drop their oxygen saturation. So that's that little pulse ox that you put on your finger, and you can see what you're, how you're oxygenating. So I think that's a double-edged sword, to be really honest with you. The way that they're using it now, it's ridiculous. The way that it's gotten into, and it's becoming, all you have to do this or else. I think we need to open up. We need to be exposed to different people. We need to touch people. We need to have eye-to-eye contact with people. I mean, this is all part of how we heal. Now, with the other thing that I really want to say is, what we know of this particular strain of virus seems pretty benign. Could somebody drop another virus strain that could be a lot more dangerous? Absolutely. Are there some of us that feel that this was a dry run for something else? Yeah, there are some of us that feel that way. So whatever we're saying today may change next week. That's why you have to think critically. The last thing I'm going to say, Jan, and I'm sorry, but somebody posted on here 10,000 international units of vitamin A day. Absolutely not. You do not take that. You will get toxic on it. So those vitamin restrictions, you have to look at the recommended daily allowances. We do need higher vitamin D3 levels. D2 is not absorbed very well. We do need vitamin C, 1 to 2 grams a day. I mean, Linus Pauling, who won the Nobel Prize, used to take 8 to 10 grams of vitamin C a day. I am not advocating that. I am just saying that probably 1 to 2 grams is really okay. If you take too much, you have the runs. And then vitamin D, vitamins, and then zinc, 25 to 50. And men need zinc and women need zinc for appropriate, hormonal regulation anyway. So anyway, thanks.
We are at 8 o'clock. Who wants to keep on going? Keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a really important question here. And this is about, this is from Janelle Rains. And can you address the plasma from people who have survived the COVID virus being given as a therapy to people who are presently struggling? Is it successful? The plasma, they're taking antibodies and they're giving it.
I have no information. I do not know. I have no information.
Okay.
I have been reported that yes, that it has been successful.
And the cost?
Yes, thousands and thousands of dollars.
Absolutely.
Of course, the plasma is acellular. I understand that, but I've still been asking. I've had patients that have called me, or families that have actually called me from around the country. And I have asked that the blood still be checked for antibodies, whether it have an IgG and IgM antibody, because if they still have the IgM antibody, they're still carrying the COVID virus. It can be contagious. And that's one thing that I think that we haven't talked about. And that's something that I think that we need to talk about, because if you have an IgG antibody, then you have built up immunity to this COVID. And you certainly shouldn't be anyone that should even consider taking a vaccine for it. You have immunity to it now. And don't get me started on the vaccine, because I am not for this vaccine at all. Now, and people ask me why. Well, I can go into that in a minute. But the IgM is the infective portion of the COVID. And we need to know when someone if their IgM, say that you come in and you say, I have been around somebody, I've been exposed to COVID-19. I work side by side with this person at the grocery store or whatever. And so we run that and we see that you have IgM, which means that you've been exposed at least to the COVID-19. Now, in my thinking as a physician, I should be able to say, all right, now, Jan, you've got the IgM. Do you want me to give you some prophylaxis hydroxychloroquine, which would be a very low dose with the zinc, and then we will follow your antibody test in about 2 weeks and see how you're doing and then see how you're feeling. To me, that would make more sense than saying, well, we'll just call it the luck of the draw. And just, if you get it, you get it. And if you don't, well, that's great. I just don't understand that. If I have a patient that came in and they tested positive for strep, but they don't have any symptoms, but yet maybe for some reason I did a strep. I don't know why I would, but if I did, wouldn't I just go on and treat them? I mean, to give them something instead of just turning them out to the general populace, for them to actually have a higher viral count to where they're spreading it, not only to the community, but to their loved ones. I mean, absolutely. I mean, we have a case now in Washington, D.C., and the parents both had COVID-19. Well, lo and behold, this just a few days ago, their 16-year-old boy came down very ill, and they had to take him to the emergency room, and he literally crashed in the emergency room, and he is now on a ventilator, 16 years old. But unfortunately now, their 14-year-old now has come down with it as well. And so, but if those parents had any type of idea and they didn't feel well, they could have gone to their doctor. If this wasn't such a controversial issue that our government and the media have made it, they could have gone, gotten a test, seen that they were IgM positive in all likelihood, had the hydroxychloroquine, and I bet anything their sons would not be in the hospital to this day. And one of them on a vent. And so it just doesn't make sense to me at all what we are doing or why we are doing it. And as I want to go over one thing that the hydroxychloroquine does, and I just want you to kind of visualize this. The hydroxychloroquine, as I said, does not kill the virus. Now remember, always think of viruses as bureaucrats. They're parasites. They live off of something else that has to make energy or make something for them. So they want in that cell. What the hydroxychloroquine does, it's sort of like I've always said, it's kind of like staining your deck. It actually puts a coating almost around that cell. And it disallows, or it stops the virus from going in. Even though it wants in, it prohibits it. Therefore, if it doesn't have anything else to live on, it itself succumbs and dies. Now, as you have the hydroxychloroquine, you lower that viral load in giving it to others. And if some happens to get into the cell, that's where the zinc comes in, because the hydroxychloroquine opens the cell for the zinc to get inside of the cell. And it actually zips up the replication of the virus. That's how they work together. And I want people to understand that. And by the way, it does not cause your teeth to fall out or your hair to fall out. Please don't be afraid of this drug. I have so many of this medication. So many people now are more afraid of the medication than they are the virus. And it is such a tragedy to see them as they continue to go downhill.
It is, and there's a point that was noted here by Emery Leonard, that on March 28th, the FDA placed hydroxychloroquine on emergency use authorization, restricted to inpatients only. So this is, kind of stopped the distribution to the general community. And who did this at the FDA, and how can we get the drug returned to where it was, which left off-label use to the treating physician, which is what we've been talking about, that a government bureaucrat should not be telling a licensed physician how to practice medicine and what to do with these medications. And in my research, I have discovered that this is coming from CDC to the health departments, and the health departments are instructing the boards of pharmacy, and they're making decisions. And this goes totally against how people are supposed to practice. You practice within your discipline. As a nurse, I have certain parameters on what I can do. As a physician, they have their parameters. As pharmacists, they have theirs. But I have never, ever seen a pharmacist say, sorry, you can't prescribe this off-label, and it's a pretty benign drug. So why did the FDA, do you think, take that position on March 28th? And by the way, didn't Dr. Zelenko have a conversation with Hahn at the FDA?
He did, yes. And that was actually, Jan, that was in regard to his study.
Okay.
It wasn't necessarily about the drug being held or put in a certain place, such as in the hospital.
Okay.
I've been asking that question now ever since it came out. And if you remember correctly, the FDA recently, as well as the CDC, they seem to be making more and more of their comments on a Sunday afternoon when nobody's paying any attention. They seem to be more and more doing that. And that's when they released the information that it would be only in the hospital. And then later on, they took down the hydroxychloroquine completely. And then I think it was on a Friday afternoon several weeks ago that's when they said that it can cause this horrible QT interval problem. And not really explaining that, but just putting fear into people. Now, remember, a fearful people are a people that are much easier to control. And so that also can be part of it. And so they have put that fear into the people. And like I said before, they've also put fear into the physicians. So we really have to look at this. History does prove itself, and it brings out the truth. Remember what the scriptures say, the truth will set you free. And that is so right, because the truth will set people free. It will give them a lot of their health. Now, I don't expect you to do like they do in Africa, where they have hydroxychloroquine on most all of the store shelves. You just go in and buy it, like you do a jug of milk, or or anything else. And so I don't expect us to do that. I think that it should be done through your family physician, and I think that your family physician also should be actually watching these antibodies, the IgM and the IgG. I think that they should be watching those as well, and be allowed to do that, because for a long time there, the CDC wouldn't allow them to allow physicians to be doing these in their office, the IgM and the IgG testing. But we need to know if you have IgG, because if you do, you have immunity, you need to get back to work. You need to get back out into society and live again. And so I think that we need to re-look at what we have done. We have shut down our economy. We have tanked our economy. We have put fear into individuals for a little over a half of what the flu deaths were in 2017 and 18. This is a tragedy.
It is, but people are asking their questions, and they're saying, well, if they're limiting access to hydroxychloroquine, if you have physicians who are afraid to prescribe it, then how do you get the drug? And I can tell you, I spoke with somebody, Boyd Parks, last evening, and he said he talked to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist here in Georgia said, well, we would give it to you only if it meets, if it's prescribed for the conditions that it's already been known to treat. And that was not going to be COVID-19. So here you have in Georgia, the pharmacy saying, if the physician prescribes it, we're not going to dispense it. And as I researched this, I saw where the Department of Health, Dr. Toomey, had written a letter regarding the fact that this is not a proven drug and blah, 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 blah. And therefore, we're going to keep it for these people who have lupus and RA, and we're not going to waste it. And that was displayed also on the Board of Pharmacy's website, which is what the pharmacists are going by. So if that's the case, what can we do? And this is just Georgia, and I know it's being in other states too. But I do know that some of you are able to prescribe it where you're at. Am I correct? Dr. Wooll, are you able to get that?
Well, you know, interestingly enough, this last weekend, I did write for hydroxychloroquine because there's a young gal that was having trouble breathing, and it really sounded like she had something. And she's the daughter-in-law of a physician. And so I called it in and found out that, well, but the threesome, right? The triad, the hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and azithromycin. And I found out Saturday, she never got it. It wasn't filled. And I said, why? And the pharmacist said, well, I didn't say no, my boss did. And there was an order come from the FDA that said that was restricted. And I said, well, since when? Because it's always been that we had to do it with certain parameters. And if I've got, you know, a good clinical suspicion, which is what I'm trained for decades and decades, then I can go ahead and write for it. I mean, it's my license. It's my relationship with the patient. It's my instruction to the patient, and I follow up with them. So they said no, basically. And I said, you know what, I'm going to write your names down. I'm going to put it in the patient chart. And if something happens to her, I'm holding you responsible. And I think that's where people need to be. People need to be in their face and go, really, Governor, you're making this decision? Where did you get your medical license? Under what authority do you have to do this? You know, because we do use 1 out of 5 drugs off label, and this is capricious, and it's just, it's political. This whole thing is political, and we need to really fight back. Constitutionally, they don't have a right to do, they don't. The other thing I want to ask your audience is, since when do you quarantine healthy people? Think about it. Never. Which goes back to, they've done everything the complete opposite of what is standard of care, right?
That is correct.
Of anything. And unfortunately, we don't have enough physicians speaking out against this because they're held captive as employees of healthcare systems. And I understand that they've been threatened when they've tried to speak out. So this comes back to us. With your help and with the help of other physicians, we can speak out. We need to be going, just like Dr. Wooll said, to our governor, to our state representatives, to our pharmacy boards. And we need to be actually educated on the issues and just to refute all this and say, this is against our constitutional rights. You are denying us access to life-saving drugs. And there's a law that says dare to try. And this is under that dare to try. Unfortunately, nobody's been doing it.
It isn't.
But I do know that, oh, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. It isn't under the right to try.
No?
Because the right to try talks about drugs that have not been approved by the FDA. This drug is approved by the FDA and has been for decades and decades and decades. They're just simply taking it off.
So, but on the flip side of it, they've said that they're not approving it for use. And that's where we're just like caught in this vortex. But I think that there could be an option for people out there. So can you talk about this telemedicine consult, either you, Vicki, or Carla Dean, where people can access that if they cannot get a physician to get them that drug, or the pharmacy to dispense?
Well, we have a program called TeleMD, TELMD. And right now it's being housed on CorsiNation.com. Corsi, CORSI, Nation.com. And you can see a link up at the top, and it says TeleMD. And you can actually, there are physicians in all 50 states that can see you on a telehealth visit. And now we don't guarantee that you get the hydroxychloroquine, the zinc, the azithromycin, the vitamin D, and so on. We don't guarantee that. It's not like dial a doc for your drugs, but what it is that you actually see a physician, they assess you, and then if they feel that you do qualify clinically for these medications, depending upon where you are in that stage and your findings, then the medications are overnight to you and put on your doorstep. And those are even in areas where they are prohibited, such as in New Jersey. New Jersey is one that was prohibited, couldn't get it, but it can be delivered there. Until just, I believe this week, Texas was the same way. And it could be brought into Texas that way. And it's at a reasonable price. It's not a gouging of the medications. But we tried to do this in order to make it not make money for some people that I'm certainly not making anything on it. And I don't have an interest in the company. I just am telling you that this is an alternative. You might have a loved one. You may have someone in a nursing home that's starting to run a fever. And you're concerned about mom or dad that's in that nursing home. And you want them to have this medication. Well, maybe they need to have such a visit like this and have it delivered to them. And it can be delivered directly to them. And within 24 hours. And so I think it's important because I had someone in Pennsylvania, a physician, and just they can't have it there and can't order it there. And they were just going on and on about how terrible it was. And I said, sign up with TeleMD and go around the government and do it in their face and say, now, here I go. I mean, step out and step up. It's time that we did this. It's past time that we did this. And unless we do, I'm telling you, they're going to continue on taking more and more from us every single day.
So ladies, this lack of hydroxychloroquine has nothing to do with a lack of quantity, and is this all being stored at this strategic national stockpile? That was a question that was asked.
My understanding is that yes, all these medications disappeared in a 3-day period because I watched it. I watched it dry up from the national pharmacy chains like CVS, Walmart, or Walgreens. And I watched it dry up from the independent pharmacy chains. And then they blame the physicians. Oh, those darn physicians, they're writing it for themselves and they're just hoarding it. Well, that's just an outright lie. Some of us may have purchased it for our patients because we just kind of had a hunch it might disappear, and it's exactly what it did. So all that time, the FDA was saying, no, we're not hoarding. We're not hoarding. We don't have it. We don't stockpile. We haven't stockpiled it. And then they go, oh yeah, we did. They did stockpile it, and then they gave it only to the hospitals, which I already told you is pretty much, it's not as effective as it really where it needs to be. My understanding, and Dr. Carla Dean can talk to this, but there's 6 different companies worldwide that make hydroxychloroquine. It's so easy, you could probably make it in a garage, although don't go do it yourself, and do not drink fish cleaner. I mean, seriously. So, it's almost comical, except some people fall for these kind of things. And so it is easy to make. My local pharmacists have told me they've got plenty in stock, but they're not, they're not prescribing it because the doctors now are kind of scared to use it, and they've been told that it doesn't work. So the whole thing is manipulative.
So bottom line is, the drug is available. Novartis they donated 130 million doses. Bayer donated 30 million doses, and Teva, I think, donated 6 or 7 million doses, in addition to all the other stuff that's coming in. So the drug is there, everybody. We know that the FDA is, for political reasons, stopping this, and they're connected very much with Fauci. And it is impacting we the people. We are under a tyranny with our medical establishment, not physicians who care and treat you, but the establishment of bureaucrats that are totally deep state. As Dr. Carla Dean pointed out, Fauci has patents on parts of these glycoproteins that have been used for these super viruses designed to kill you. And then he also has patents on things that are going to be used in the vaccine, which brings me, should be to maybe my last question, unless somebody else has another one, but there's a lot here because we want to know how to proceed, because we feel more confident now that this what we can do to help ourselves. But if we can't get hydroxychloroquine, do you think quinine water helps?
No.
I have heard that. No.
I think that you'd have to drink an awful lot of quinine water. And I think that you would spend most of your time in the bathroom.
Okay. So we don't want to do that. So my last question here is from Lynn Goldhammer. She said, I saw an article that COVID-19 was patented in 2008. So was a vaccine for it. The vaccine was approved in November 2019, just before the virus showed up. Have you heard if there is any investigation being made into that? So what do you think?
I don't have any knowledge of that at all. There's no vaccine that is going to absolutely be anytime soon, nor should it be. Now, why? We've got to go back to common sense. The flu vaccine, every year it is changed. What we have in it. I want people to know on this call, only the flu vaccine is only about 30% coverage for us. Yet we take it every year. And what do you hear every year? Did you get your flu vaccine? Did you get your flu vaccine? But it changes every year. This virus, this COVID-19, we already know there's mutations out there now that have happened. How long have we had this virus? It hasn't been 3 or 4 years. It's been in the months, yet it's already changed. And so if you made a vaccine for this virus, say that we made it back in January, well, now it wouldn't even be really that effective. And they've made vaccines similar to this before with COVID. And when they've given it, it's actually killed those that they had given it to. And so it's very dangerous for us to think that we can come up with a quick vaccine. We shouldn't be even thinking about this because we don't even know what the virus is doing yet. So why would you make a vaccine with something that continues to change and is changing rapidly?
Well, Carla Dean, I read an article that said Pfizer has a vaccine that they plan to release in September. So perhaps that is the vaccine that had been patented and was approved in November of 2019, which we know that they had actually done a simulation called Event 201, what happens with the global pandemic, and they've been planning this. So this maybe, and Pfizer, it is true they're planning on releasing something, but as you just said, the efficacy of what that vaccine is left to be determined.
Well, I think that the first two people that should take it is Fauci and Bill Gates.
I agree. That would be a great idea. So so most of everybody here has talked about the concern for wearing their face masks and what we need to be doing. And I think we've established that that's probably not necessary right now unless you have a condition where you need to be protected. But wearing it for any length of time will affect your ability to breathe properly. In addition, if you have any viral load there, it will only make it worse. So it makes no sense to do that. And that we have the opportunity with it's telemed, right? To be able to use the telemed people to get hydroxychloroquine. We still have a problem here in Georgia that we're going to have to address with our elected representatives to release the drug, and that we need to, what can we do? What's going on with Donald Trump? He knows about this. He knows about Dr. Zelenko. I think you guys have given him information on hydroxychloroquine, and he keeps bringing it up, but they keep beating him down on it. What's your thought?
I'm not sure exactly what he's supposed to do because, you know, the top people it's so political. I will tell you, I had a patient just today. I told him about hydroxychloroquine, and he quote unquote said, I would never take that drug just because Donald Trump said it was good. And I was like, even if it meant that you could die? And he said, yes. So it's, you know, Donald Trump, bless him, he's a lightning rod. And yeah, I think it's all political. And I think his hands are kind of tied when you've got all the major news media speaking against him. He can't say anything without it getting distorted and making all kinds of headlines. He has come out and said that it's good. And so I don't know how else to answer that. I don't know what he's thinking.
Okay.
I don't think that he's pushing either for forced vaccines. I think what he is saying is that they're going to have I have heard, now maybe he has said that, I'll have to look at the newsreels, but I think what he has said is that there is a vaccine coming because that's what he's been told. Donald Trump is not a doctor. He's not a physician. He doesn't even try to be, but he has turned to what he thought were the experts and what he has been thinking are the experts. And supposedly they are supposed to be. But unfortunately, I think that he has misinformation, just like the majority of the American people at this time do. And I want to say this too, that I got a letter from Brazil today, and they think that America has gone absolutely crazy. They say, what in the world? Who told you people who did the testing that 6 foot apart is going to save you? Who did that double-blind study? Well, I haven't seen a double-blind study on being 6 foot apart. Does that really keep you safe? Not necessarily. We don't know that for sure. And they said, well, why is it that you people aren't using the hydroxychloroquine to save more of your people? What are you doing? And they really also feel that there are underlying possible nefarious reasons why we are not having this medication given to us.
Yes. So
I'm going to have to go. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carla Dean and Dr. Vicki Wooll. I will say one thing. Carla Dean, do you want to say that about your nonprofit at all?
We do have a nonprofit. It's a 501c3. Vicki and I both, personalized healthcare network. We want, what we really want is just to do what we were trained to do. And that is take care of the patient, not the paperwork, not the bureaucracy, because we want that patient-physician relationship back together again. So where we don't have a triangle in the room, where we don't have the government in the room, where we don't have the insurance company, we don't have the hospital administrators telling physicians what to do and how to do it. No, that's not what medicine is about. It's about a relationship. And for me personally, I call it the sacred relationship. So thank you.
Thank you, Carla Dean. God bless you. And thank you for everything that you've given us hope, and you've given us encouragement, and we're going to have a plan. We have to do it. The people have to do it. We cannot rely on anybody else.
If the people don't do it, then we have missed an opportunity. And I am telling you, I can see it in every area of life. We're going to lose this republic. And we're going to lose not just healthcare, but we're going to lose much more than that. And we will sit around and tell our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, when America was once free. Thank you.
Well, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to try. Thank you, Vicki Wooll, Dr. Vicki Wooll. Do you have any closing remarks?
I don't. I concur wholeheartedly with Carla Dean, though. I live this. It's happening. Oh yes, I do have one other remark. Part of the warfare that is directed toward the people is through artificial intelligence, by taking narratives and spinning them every which way but loose. It leaves you off kilter. It leaves you frightened, and you don't know where to look for. You don't know where to look for truth. So when you start seeing these ideas pop up and they seem contradictory, know that it's actually a technology that was developed against ISIS, and that it's being used by the political parties to brainwash you, basically. And it's all geared toward, again, probably disrupting the election process.
Right. You're right. So we have our marching orders. We need to know what we're doing in our individual states, talk to our elected representatives, get really smart about that, and not give up until we have complete access.
And call the FDA, call the CDC.
Yes.
Call them directly. Make their life miserable, please. Oh, please make their life miserable. They've made ours so miserable. I think turnabout's fair play.
I think that could be a campaign. I'll see about putting that together. Let's, call the FDA all within the same week, every day for 1 week.
I would love that.
So would I.
Oh, that would make a happy day for me. Thank you.
Okay. We'll ring that bell. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I tried to get everybody's questions. There were so many. If you have another question, let me know, and I will ask them later and get that information back.
That's right.
Okay.
And if you want to learn more about the John Birch Society, I am the field coordinator in Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. My name is Evan Mulch. You can call me at 864-804-0789. Again, that's 864-804-0789. And since we mentioned Congressman Larry McDonald at the start of this, I am going to play a Larry McDonald video called Education is the Key. So if you want to stick around and watch this, you can. If you have to go, you're welcome to go ahead and take off. But anyways, it's a good time to learn about what we need to do to help restore and save America. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Evan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Robert Welch, and in 1958, I presided at the founding of the John Birch Society. From our very beginning, we've sought to accomplish two main goals. The first is to warn the people of the world, and especially the people of the United States, about the existence of a master conspiracy which actively seeks to enslave all mankind. And our second and more enduring goal is to bring about an era of less government, more responsibility, and, with God's help, a better world. We remain fixed on this same dual course today. When we began our effort in the late 1950s, there were relatively few persons who could grasp the importance of our message, for there were very few who even suspected that any real problem existed. Today, however, that situation has changed remarkably. Now there are very few Americans who do not sense that something is vitally wrong in our country and throughout the world. It is not my purpose on this occasion to discuss either the problem facing us or the solution offered by the John Birch Society. Instead, I shall leave those tasks to a man who is uniquely qualified to handle them. That man comes to us from Georgia, where he earned a degree as a medical doctor at the age of 22. And from a very good school, incidentally. He then spent several years, or a few years anyway, as a flight surgeon in the United States Navy. While doing advanced work in surgery in 1963, he became interested in and joined the John Birch Society as a local member. Always a leader in every pursuit to which he sets his mind, his ability and determination saw him rise soon to leadership positions in the Society's structure, and in 1967 to membership on our National Council. Several years ago, he gave up his very successful career in medicine to enter the political world. Since 1974, he has repeatedly been elected by the people of the 7th District of Georgia as their representative in the United States Congress. As a longtime member of the Society, of our National Council, and of the United States Congress, he is highly qualified to analyze the problems facing our nation and our civilization today. And his experience as a congressman has confirmed for him the wisdom of our unchanging course for solving those problems, which unchanging course we long ago summarized as follows: education is our total strategy, and truth is our only weapon. Here now to tell you about some serious problems, but also to explain in more detail how they can be solved, is my very good friend, Congressman Lawrence P. McDonald.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Mr. Welch. I'd like to express my appreciation to all of you today who are here in this gathering and who have given up your time and many of the competing areas that, for your time to come out and to discuss and to review some problems that we face as a nation. I'd like to express my appreciation to those who, through the magic of television and videotape, are also able to join in this presentation. You know, a few days ago, riding in Georgia with my administrative aide, I mentioned that we would be having this presentation and some of the frustrations that such a presentation brings. Because in the past years, 10 or 15 years ago, in speaking before an audience, it was first necessary to review many of the problems of around the world and what transitions taking place in our land. On such an occasion, it would be for the speaker a foregone conclusion that would have to spend perhaps an hour or so in a rather monotonous, steady review. This was somewhat frustrating because you knew that in advance there would be that hour-long presentation regardless of the audience in instance after instance before you could even get into the area of solutions. But he mentioned that 10 years ago this was perhaps a great problem because that you did have to spell out in great detail. 5 years ago, in most audiences, there was greater understanding, but it was still necessary to draw a rather clear diagram. But today, I think more and more people across our land are realizing that we as a people and as a nation have some very serious problems. And there's not a great deal of understanding about what steps might be taken to reverse these problems, but nevertheless, there is an understanding that we as a nation must reverse our present course. So I guess you could say there's the good news that more people are waking up today to the fact that there is a problem. The bad news is that the problem to which they're awakening is much worse today than in times past. We're able to meet tonight in this gathering because a little over 200 years ago, those 56 men came together in Philadelphia to join together in a move for independence because they felt that there were two basic problems in the land. First, that taxes were too high and there were too many controlled by the kings and the king's agents over their day-to-day affairs. And because of these concerns, they were willing to come together in a move for independence, signing that document pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. They kept that pledge, even though some of them made tremendous sacrifices. A number of them were quite wealthy, and they saw their fortunes swept away. Some of them died penniless, in the case of Thomas Jefferson, able to just pay his debts, and others died in great debt. They made that great sacrifice in giving us this new land and new government. A government and a society of which had three major pillars of strength. The first being that of a concept of right and wrong, a legal right and wrong in society that was founded on the principles of a constitutional republic. Coming from the Latin word res publica, meaning the public thing, in this case the law being the Constitution of the United States. It was a unique system of government, and because down through the ages, and certainly today all across the world, most governments, right and wrong is based upon the judgment decisions of men, whether it's the ruling junta or the Politburo or the Star Chamber or the Council of Elders. But our founding fathers knew that historically that form of government traditionally tends to drift over into ultimately total government and then to chaos and anarchy. And they wanted to avoid this in our society. So right and wrong in our system was to be based upon the law and not the judgment decisions of men. And Thomas Jefferson said, to spell this out further, yes, we did produce a near perfect republic, but will they keep it? Or will they, in the enjoyment of plenty, lose the memory of freedom? Material abundance without character is the surest way to destruction. Rather frightening, you know, when you look around today and you realize that many of our friends are so very busy enjoying the good life. I think we all enjoy the good life, and it's a lot of fun to be able to go out to the lake with a family or to have the picnics or to gather with friends. But I think too many of our friends and neighbors have not been willing to take the time and make the effort to protect the system that allows the good life to be possible. And that was the challenge and the warning that Thomas Jefferson gave us. The second pillar of our strength rests upon a basis or system of prosperity which came to be known as a free enterprise system. I think it gains its strength not because it is a system, but because of the lack of a system. In short, the government was to stay off your back and out of your pockets, or to stay away from the farms, away from the businesses, away from the professions. The government was not to be involved. We've seen a great change in my lifetime, certainly in the 20th century, away from the limitations placed upon our society by a Constitution, and most particularly a Bill of Rights, which were essentially negative documents restricting the growth and activities of government. Today we find the federal government involved in the professions, telling doctors how to doctor and telling teachers how to teach, and as one wag said, telling carpenters how to carp. But we have seen the tremendous growth in government in the 20th century, an explosive growth far beyond the boundaries imposed by our Constitution. Today there's hardly a single area of activity in this country or indeed around the world where the United States federal government is not involved. This has produced, of course, an explosive growth in the cost of government. Politicians are reluctant to raise the taxes directly to pay for that explosive growth. This means deficits. And out of the deficits, we have a growing national debt, where today just servicing that debt has become the third largest item in the federal budget. And to further service the debt and the creation of new money, we have had the development of a central banking apparatus, in this case, the Federal Reserve System. Now, our founding fathers had a great argument over this point of the question of a central bank, and there's been argument down through the decades on this point. But one thing that is very clear with the development of this, it has become the engine of inflation. Thomas Jefferson, in warning about the question of a federal debt, had this to say: "I place economy among the first and most important virtues, and public debt as the greatest of dangers to be feared. To preserve our independence, we must make our election between economy and liberty, or profusion and servitude. If we run into such debts, we must be taxed in our meat and drinks, in our necessities and comforts, in our labors and our amusements. If we can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of caring for them, they must become happy." I think the emphasis on that has to be that last sentence, that if we can prevent the government from wasting the labors of the people under the pretense of caring for them, they must become happy. Now, with this explosive growth of new money, that means, of course, inflation. Now, I know that many people are being led to believe that politicians in Washington during the political season are going to save us from the ravages of inflation. Perhaps if you only remember one thing tonight, I hope you will remember at least this: that politicians do not fear inflation. They love it, because inflation is the mechanism that allows them to expand the currency, to satisfy, to make up the deficits that allow them to pay for the expanding federal program, to satisfy the special interest groups, to guarantee their elections. Politicians do not fear inflation. They love it. It is the mechanism for buying votes, in so many cases, to ensure their re-elections. So many people today have the attitude that inflation is a problem of rising prices. Indeed, we are led to believe that this is the case. And as long as we lack an understanding of basic issues, we will continue to be plagued with problems like inflation. But saying that inflation is like rising prices is just about as foolish as saying that wet streets cause rain. It's the other way around. Inflation is an increase in the money supply. Who causes inflation? Well, two groups. Counterfeiters can cause inflation when they run off pieces of paper in their basement, printing them up, passing them out in society, because by so doing, they steal from society as a whole. Federal government, to make up the deficits, servicing the deficits, and creating new money, whether by direct printing press or bookkeeping entry or borrowing from the capital markets, also is passing out new money without backing. The principle of immorality remains the same. Counterfeiters, we catch them, we put them in jail. In the case of government, we frequently return the politicians to office, praising them as great humanitarians in their process of expanding the money supply. This tremendous growth in inflation, in government, has brought us the deficits and debt, exactly that as feared by Thomas Jefferson and many other of our founding fathers, to where today we have the greatest debt in the history of the world, approaching officially $1 trillion. But you know, when you go to the areas of unfunded liability, you're looking at a debt approaching $8 or $9 trillion. If you handle the government accounting in the same way that you would handle in the case of a private business or profession, in the area of promises made but money not in the till, you're looking at a massive debt of $7, $8, or $9 trillions of dollars. The interest on the debt is today the third largest item, as I mentioned, in the national debt, in our national budget, costing us at a rate of over $2,300 per second, 60 seconds to the minute, 60 minutes to the hour, 24 hours a day, 365 and a quarter days a year. You know, just to cover this, it takes about $60,000 in time just to review the massive importance of the cost to the taxpayers just by that third segment of the budget. With the growth of government, we have seen a strangulation of our productive society with agencies such as EPA, OSHA, and many others, that vast alphabet soup in Washington. We're finding that American productivity is grinding down to the level of stagnation. Competing countries such as West Germany, Switzerland, and Japan are expanding their productive capability per person at a rate of 10, 12% steadily right along. This has meant that in the competitive world of the world markets, we find that American goods have increasing difficulties. Well, the simple answer that many people propose is the way to solve this, of course, is just simply higher tariffs. But you know, the last time we adopted that philosophy was back during the late 20s, early 30s, and with the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Acts. And most economists will agree that the great worldwide depression was linked to the tariff wars of that period. There wasn't anything very good about the last great worldwide depression, and I certainly don't think that many of us would agree that we need another one today. There's been a basic shift in the philosophy of our society and philosophy of government away from the concept of the government's function to protect life and property and over to a concept of government being the agent for the redistribution of income. Today, 60% of the federal budget activity, of the federal government's activity, is that category known as transfer payments. This is where you use the power of government to take money from those who earned it and transfer it over to those who did not. This means that in the process of doing that, we're increasingly penalizing the productive sector and subsidizing the non-productive sector. So that the government's major function today is that of being the leveler of society in the redistribution of income. Now, one thing is very clear in reading the writings of our founding fathers, in writing the Constitution and in adding the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. They did everything they could to make the leveling of society as a function of government unconstitutional. Today, that's 60% of the federal activity. You know, I speak to a lot of high school and student groups. I frequently ask the students in philosophical terms, what is the proper function of the federal government? The typical answer is that government today should provide me with those things that I feel that I need that I cannot provide for myself. Unfortunately, this is not an atypical answer. This is the traditional or typical answer. This has brought about a tremendous change where more and more people are being led to believe, you know, it's a lot easier to vote yourself a living than it is to work for a living. I think the growing welfare rolls reflects the continuing attitude of government's function as a provider rather than a protector. Those functions of government traditionally interpreted as their reason for being in the American system, namely that of protection of life and property, in the area of internal security, that function of the federal government, such as the function against subversives or against terrorists, has been all but totally disbanded. Today, groups in the Congress, such as the House Internal Security Committee, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, the Internal Security Division of the Justice Department, the Subversive Activities Control Board, the Attorney General's list of subversives, and one layer of protection after another have been totally disbanded. Just a few remnants or elements within the FBI or the CIA remain. We find a change in the emphasis upon our armed services, particularly apparent in recent decades. We can look back to the year of 1955 when 55% of our budget went for defense. 10 years later, 1965, 40% of the budget went for defense. 10 years later, 1975, 25% of the budget goes for national defense. Today, about 22 or 21% goes for defense. And yet, in our Constitution, in the preamble, it makes it very clear that it will be the government's function to provide the common defense and to promote the general welfare. By this they meant a climate by which individuals would have an opportunity to make of themselves that which they would. We today have the verbs reversed. We have the feeling that is somehow to promote a general climate of protection, but to provide for the general welfare. I think many people have it reversed and confused. That section of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, gives the Congress the authority to raise the armies and navies necessary to provide for the common defense. In the United States, we are spending roughly 6% of our gross national product on defense. The Soviet Union, by comparison, is spending roughly 17 to 22%. It's difficult to say exactly, but 17 to 22% on their military effort. It's interesting to compare in history because Nazi Germany, at its height, was able to get up to 15%. Well, I suppose the obvious question is, if Nazi Germany was able to reach 15%, how is it that the Soviets were able to go 17 or 22%? Well, the answer to that, in part, is that the Western institutions, banking institutions, and various lending agencies have transferred money to the Soviet Union and to Eastern Europe to the tune of between 60 and 80 billions of dollars. And in addition to that, there's been a massive transfer of technology, allowing the Soviets to leapfrog much of the early development, research and development testing of new systems, new engineering systems, new electronic systems, and weapon systems. But in my lifetime, we've seen a tremendous shift in the government away from the concept of protection to where the major function today is to provide. Our founding fathers gave us a third pillar of strength for our new nation, and that was a concept of morality based upon a biblical basis or concept, hearkening back to the 10 Commandments of the Old Testament and the teachings of Christ in the New. In other words, this was to be the glue or the matrix that was to hold our society together. Now, as a member of Congress, I can tell you that hardly a week goes by that some member doesn't stand up on the House floor and to shout out that you cannot legislate morality. Of course, if you mean that by legislation automatically people will be good, I would agree. But it's really a trap laid for fools if you stop and realize that all law is morality enacted. The only question is, what is the basis of that morality? We were founded on the concept of a biblical basis of morality upon which our laws were to be based. Going back once again to the Old Testament, 10 Commandments, and the lessons in the New Testament. But in my lifetime, we've seen an increasing shift to a new basis of law and morality, that of humanism. Today, many people are rather confused about humanism because it sounds somewhat like humanitarianism. Humanitarianism is a logical concern about the welfare of your fellow man, a just concern about the problems of your neighbor. But humanism is entirely different. Humanism means kicking God out of the universe and replacing that vacuum created by kicking God out with man and man's technology. And therefore, right and wrong under the humanist is no longer to be based upon any eternal truths or eternal verities, but instead to be based upon whatever seems to benefit man at that time, or man's agency, which is government. This has been the shift in my lifetime. It's very evident, of course, in our textbooks, in our schools, certainly in our entertainment industry, and you would certainly have to say in the laws passed by Congress today. Sad to say, you even sometimes run across some pretty strong passages of humanism in much of the church literature available in many of our churches. Now, I must admit, I'm not much of an advocate or a supporter of Karl Marx, as you probably would imagine. But it was Karl Marx that said that humanism is Marxism and Marxism is humanism. And in that, I would agree. The most malignant form or militant humanism we have seen in the 20th century, that of international communism. But every person here and your friends and neighbors have a very clear responsibility in this changing crisis, the challenge before us, to become actively involved and demonstrate their own personal responsibility. The question is, what is the most efficient and effective way to discharge that responsibility? Lenin passed away in 1924. However, before his death, he laid down a three-step program for world conquest, accurately paraphrased and summarized as: first, we will take Eastern Europe, and second, the masses of Asia, and third, we will encircle the last bastion of capitalism, the United States of America. We will not have to attack. It will fall like overripe fruit into our hands. Well, principally as a result of the turmoil following World War I and the chaos and some of the changes that took place at that time, old Tsarist Russia was able to fall under communist domination. And what was known as Russia became the first victim of international communism. They were able to spread their control to surrounding areas such as Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Belarusia, the Ukraine. And then in the late 1930s were able to expand to the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. As a result of the agreements and some of the wartime aggression, as in the case of Eastern and Central Poland, and the wartime agreements such as at Yalta and also at Tehran, we have seen the tremendous expansion of that communist empire to now include Eastern and Central Europe. And the first step was completed. Once again, as a result of agreements at Yalta and some of the events that transpired through policies of the United States government, by 1949-1950, we saw mainland China fall to communist hands. And today, even though we have promised that it would be peace with honor, it turned out to be neither peace nor honor, and we are witnessing the greatest genocide, percentage-wise, in the history of the world in Southeast Asia. And we're seeing the mopping up of the final masses of Asia. In the case of the encirclement, we have seen by the 1950s a major Soviet satellite taking place in the Caribbean as a result of United States State Department policies and as a result of the news media, principally the New York Times. It's not quite a joke to say that Castro got his job through the New York Times. But few Americans are aware that the second country in the Western Hemisphere to receive large amounts of Soviet aid has been the country of Peru. Today, between 200 and 300 Soviet T-54 and T-55 tanks have been shipped and are now in Peru. Soviet surface-to-air missiles, SAM missiles, Czechoslovakian howitzers, transportation system, and supersonic fighter attack aircraft have all been shipped from the satellite states to the country of Peru. In 1979, we saw the satellite in the Central American area of Nicaragua fall to communist hands under the Sandinistas. We will be lucky if we do not see that process extended very rapidly to El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. In the case of Costa Rica, it was so internally weakened and completely infiltrated by the Sandinista cause that it is in a situation, a nation without any military might. It is in the situation of, frankly, being taken by a phone call whenever they wish to exercise that particular option. These are transitions that are taking place in our lifetimes, taking place in these months, with the possibility in the very near future for tremendous pressure to be brought upon our southern neighbor, Mexico, with the vast potential of a tremendous refugee problem developing as a result of turmoil in Central America extending up into the Mexican area. These are the changes that are taking place. Now, how to change this? Well, we all are anxious to be effective and efficient in this, and the best way as individuals we would have to recognize is by changing policies in Washington, because Washington is the key. But Washington is divided into three separate branches of government. The executive branch of government, the president and his cabinet, and that vast bureaucracy of HUD, of HEW, which has now been divided into a brand new satellite bureaucracy, the FCC, IRS, and so forth, that whole vast alphabet soup. The executive branch agency today makes up 98% of the federal government. Second branch of the federal government, of course, is the judicial branch with the Supreme Court and the federal court structure. In my opinion, no amount of sacrifice by any individual here or your friends and neighbors of time or treasure is going to be able to change the problems immediately that we now find in the federal judiciary. That is going to be a long, slow process of reversal as we're able to reestablish constitutional law as the basis for legal interpretation and move away from social law as the basis. That will be a battle into the future. In my lifetime, we have seen parties come and parties go in the White House. But all too often, perhaps now by the opportunity of examination in retrospect, we have seen whether it's Democrat or Republican, at the very top levels, the same forces seem to control in the White House. By default, this brings us down to the third branch of the federal government, legislative branch, divided into the Senate and the House of Representatives. And I think here is the tremendous opportunity in the Congress where we have a chance to make a change. Congress is the key. This is especially true in the House of Representatives, because in the House of Representative elections, those elections are very close to the people and cannot be readily changed or influenced or dominated by the national news media. Much of the media, in the case of an individual congressional district, is divided by small towns and small town media outlets. And here is a chance where, by building an informed electorate and understanding at the grassroots level, people can make a change and have that change felt in Washington. Now, my remarks in this presentation, and indeed my views, are nonpartisan. I think there's enough blame to spread around to all political parties, certainly in my lifetime. And let me add just a footnote here that the John Birch Society is not a political organization, in that it does not endorse or contribute to any party or candidate. In my various congressional races, I've never received a cent from the John Birch Society or an endorsement. But individual members of the John Birch Society you will find to be the best informed and most active in the communities, working for those candidates who are willing to spend their efforts and their energies to develop a reestablishment of our constitutional republic, a sound economy, and a strong national defense once again. The John Birch Society is non-political, but it is active in building understanding at the grassroots level. By way of background, the John Birch Society was founded in 1958 by Mr. Robert Welch, when he invited some 11 or 12 leading Americans to meet with him in Indianapolis to hear him out on a two-day presentation which has since been printed in book form, known as the Blue Book of the John Birch Society. And in this particular presentation, the first 40 pages or so was first a capsule review of the problems we face. And after reviewing the problems, the remaining 140 pages was involved in an effective, efficient, and honorable solution to those problems, based upon the need to build an informed electorate at the grassroots level. You know, Joseph de Maistre said that you get the kind of government you deserve, and I think that's a truism today. He said it in French almost 200 years ago, but it applies to America and the problems that we face. We lack an informed electorate. And if you're concerned about the problems and representation that we have in Washington, well, all you have to do is talk to your friends and neighbors and see that lack of understanding. And it is totally illogical to expect to have in Washington a knight riding a white horse and wearing shining armor, slaying dragons in your behalf, if your friends and neighbors don't understand and frankly don't care. It's in the living rooms that the battle is going to be won or lost. That might seem strange and it might seem unusual to believe, but it has always been that way. You know, we can look back in the Old Testament in the 5th chapter of the prophet Isaiah, 13th verse. Here is the prophet lamenting the fact that the people in his lifetime are being led off into captivity because they lack knowledge. And then turning over into the 4th chapter, the 6th verse of the prophet Hosea. And here's the prophet holding his head, wringing his hands in woe because his people being led off into captivity because they lack knowledge. The John Birch Society was founded to build an informed electorate and to reverse that problem. And it has been the most successful organization of its kind in the world. With today over 3,500 chapters, with tens of thousands of members, and an organization unparalleled in the history of the world. I think we're losing because we have a lack of understanding. With that lack, it is tailor-made for many of our representatives in Washington. As one of my colleagues in the Congress, Steve Sims, said, that we are saddled with a lot of people as in the political world who are political transvestites. Now, I know that may be a little bit rough, but what he meant was that many people are able to come back to their districts and speak like a George Wallace and then go back to Washington and vote like a George McGovern, and they get away with it. Now, I, like many of you, have been in the audiences of Rotary clubs or Kiwanis clubs or Chamber of Commerce's. And I've seen representatives come back from Washington or senators come back, and the standard format is that they give maybe 3 good jokes and give phrases suggestive that they support traditional American values, and we stand up and give them standing ovations. And I'll tell you this, many of them laugh their way all the way back to Washington. But as long as we do this on the basis that, well, here's somebody really important, and he came to my group, so therefore if he came to my group, that must mean I am important, so therefore I will stand and honor such an individual. As long as our understanding is on such a shallow basis, we will continue to get those who will vote for more government, more controls, and more spending. Now, I don't want to be too harsh on this point, but I, in my own mind, have always felt that people who are preoccupied with the presidential races are rather shallow in their understanding, or maybe even in some cases just a little bit downright dumb. You know, it's really rather easy once every 4 years to put a bumper sticker on for 2 weeks. I think that's why it's so appealing. It doesn't require any great deal of understanding or commitment. But to those individuals who are willing to take a look in the background of the issues and take a look at the voting and the representation of their representative in the Congress and in their senator, these are the individuals who deserve the great praise, and that requires a lot of hard work, day in and day out, not just at election time. But once again, the Congress is the key. Fortunately today, there are many avenues that are able to improve that activity. The John Birch Society has been able to very successfully form one of those ad hoc committees known as TRIM, with the acronym meaning Tax Reform Immediately. Because with TRIM, here is an organization that on a quarterly basis publishes the key votes of members of the House of Representatives on the issue of where they had an opportunity on a bill that would have been viewed by a classical interpretation of the Constitution as unconstitutional, where the representative had a choice of voting for less taxes and less government, or more taxes and more government, which way did that representative go? And without making any statement on whether which would be right and which would be wrong, Trim has been active in publishing the record of the representatives. Today, there are over 300 separate Trim committees. And as a member of Congress, let me assure you that they are having a devastating impact upon the members. Many members are changing their voting habits because of an active Trim committee in their district. 5,000 is a minor nuisance when it's just a 5,000 distribution of Trim bulletins. But when it gets up to 40,000 Trim bulletins distributed every quarter to the people in that district, letting them know the voting record of their representative, that usually is the dividing point between a representative that gets elected or reelected and one that's going to have to step aside if he's been one of those who's been falling into the political transvestite category. In short, Trim has been successful at making a division between the rhetoric and the record, stopping the political hypocrisy of those who've been able up till now to get elected saying one thing back home and doing a different thing in Washington, bowing to these special interest groups. Now, in Washington, referring once again to the Congress, let me give you my own subjective analysis of the House of Representatives. Not being in the Senate, I can't give you such a clear analysis of the Senate, but with the House, as you know, it is divided into 435 members. Now, to my own subjective evaluation, I would say that the House is subdivided into 3 separate categories. 2 of the categories are ideological groups. 1 category is non-ideological. Now, they all look and act like politicians. Whether you're looking or examining on the campaign trail Larry McDonald in Georgia, or Ron Dellums in California, or perhaps once upon a time a Bella Abzug in New York, all 3 will be active in the parades, shaking hands, passing out bubble gum, waving to people, and so forth. You might say, well, why do you do those silly things? The answer is, when you lack an informed electorate, so many of the people demand that you play the game. And many of the people will say, well, so-and-so shook my hand, but someone else did not, and so the one that did not must be a stuffed shirt, and so therefore I'll vote for the person who shook my hand. Now, you may feel that very few people vote on such a shallow basis, but I'm sorry to say that you are sadly mistaken. Many people, since we do not have an adequate level of understanding, many people do indeed base their vote and their support on such a shallow level. So when you're judging individual members of the House of Representatives on the campaign trail, they all look and act the same or quite similar. But when you examine or analyze the voting records of members of the House, it is on this occasion that you find the 3 categories evolve. In my own analysis, 1 category with about 100 to 110 members is philosophically dedicated to the principles or to the objective of building a totalitarian socialist order. Now, that group is subdivided into those who believe the way to get there is by revolution, violence, destroy the system, and upon the ashes we will erect the perfect totalitarian utopian state. Probably a larger subdivision of this group believes the best way to get there is by gradual change, gradually twisting and perverting the Constitution until someday the people will wake up and realize that they have this system and they're willing to accept it. Whether by revolution or evolution, the objective is the same: a totally controlled society where government will do the planning for the farms, the professions, the schools, and the communities. The central government in Washington will make the individual decisions of the marketplace. Well, there's another group that also is philosophically committed pretty much to the principles of reestablishing limited government as defined in our Constitution. In my own subjective evaluation, I would say that group is perhaps 35 to 40 members strong at the present time. Most members, about 300, fall into a middle category. They are philosophically committed to the principles of, are you ready? Getting reelected. Nothing more, nothing less. And they're guided by a wet finger in the wind. Incidentally, it's not the money involved. Some of you may feel that as a member of Congress, it looks like a magnificent salary, but many members have residences in the Washington area and one in their representative states. But it's not the money involved, in my opinion. I think it's the aura of prestige. Good morning, Mr. Congressman. Let me catch the door for you, Mr. Congressman. This, which is a very heady mixture, a very intoxicating force. And if that sounds strange, the illusion of power, or the concentration of power, has been perhaps one of the most intoxicating forces down through history, certainly in the history of mankind. For the short term, with the building of an informed electorate, it would be possible to re-elect or to elect those who stand firm for sound principles of economics, for sound principles of government, and to rebuild the principles that made this country great and to stop this nation's retreat from our greatness. In time, with the expansion of an informed electorate through an organized effort, I would hope that we would be able to have an overwhelming majority, both in the House and Senate, individuals fully committed to the principles of constitutional government, a sound economy, and a strong security. Now, it's been my pleasure and honor to serve in the advisory boards of a number of different national organizations. In my capacity in the advisory board of the various organizations, and as a member of the National Council of the John Birch Society, I've had an opportunity to compare these organizations, which have a similar objective, but have a different route in fulfilling that objective. The various organizations that I mentioned are essentially structured as an upside-down pyramid, with the members of the organizations, whether it's the American Conservative Union, Conservative Caucus, American Security Council, or others, the member is down at the bottom at the apex, and the national office, usually in Washington, is up at the top across the base. Now, when all is said and done, the basic function of the member at the bottom is to receive mail requesting funds to be sent up to the home office where a particular project is to take place. This fundraising function is usually handled by one of the major mail order or mail out type firms located there in Washington. Now, you might be interested in knowing that the standard fee for handling this service is usually a 60 to 90% takeout of the funds collected. For example, say you have a particular project that is being presented by this organization, a project that you have great interest in, and so you go down to the bank and you take out of your savings $1,000 and you send it to the home office to be able to fulfill that particular project. Well, the standard takeout in the typical contract today is $600 to $900 goes to the group that sent the letter. The remainder goes to the home office of that organization to have a purchase of the stationery, purchase of the stamps, for the salaries of the secretaries, the lease of the buildings, lease of the typewriters, to do whatever work is done there in the nation's capital or on perhaps a nationwide project. Now, in the case of the John Birch Society, it is organized as a traditional pyramid with the apex at the top and the base across the bottom. The apex referring to the headquarters of the John Birch Society, the national leadership in Belmont, Massachusetts, and the base at the bottom, the individual members and chapters of the John Birch Society, the chapters numbering over 3,500, and the tens of thousands of members being coordinated by the paid field staff now numbering over 80. And as an advisor to the various national organizations, let me say that these organizations would love to have that type of coordinated approach at the grassroots level, but they simply do not have the regular monthly bulletin, the individual chapters meeting on a twice monthly basis, and the field staff to coordinate the activities. But there's another difference. The society raises its own funds, so there is not the 60 to 90% takeout fee that you find so apparent in the other national organizations that in many instances have similar concerns to those of the John Birch Society. But the society is able to multiply its efforts because it is at the grassroots level that individual members buy the stamps, buy the stationery, use their own pen or pencil or their own typewriter, use their own shoe leather to get petitions signed or be able to have trim bulletins distributed or to have films or film strips shown or audiences gained for speakers in their communities, or for such programs as the promotion of the monthly magazine of the Society, American Opinion, or the weekly publication, Review of the News. These are all of some of the many different programs of the John Birch Society, so active at the grassroots level in building an informed electorate. Now, back a number of years ago, when I first joined the Society, I assumed at that time that understanding the political and economic systems that made this country great would be a very difficult task. But understanding the various political forces making up current events, well, that would be pretty easy to understand and review, because after all, you have the fellows wearing the white hats and those wearing the dark hats, and that's how you tell the difference. After having the opportunity through the educational program of the Society of being able to do my own reading and seeing the films and film strips and other programs, I have come to see that the various political systems and economic systems that bring about prosperity in a tranquil society, those concepts are relatively easy to grasp. Understanding contemporary affairs, however, is very difficult. But as a member of Congress, I have seen the massive, powerful groups in Washington at work on a daily basis. And I've seen national groups in their writings and in activities and in their memberships and members, such as the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and others, which are working to transfer our national sovereignty into some type of regional government on the road to a global, one world governmental structure. And as a member of Congress, those actions are very evident in our national trends. Now, you have a very clear responsibility to stand up to reestablish those principles that gave us our greatness. And this is a responsibility that you cannot transfer to your neighbor or to someone else in your family. We can work to try to bring your neighbor and members of your family into better areas of understanding to get them to join with us. But you have an opportunity in the action and educational program of the John Birch Society to take an effective, honorable, and efficient stand to reestablish those principles that made this country great. In the question of whether or not to join such an organization, you have three separate options. The first option is, yes, to go ahead and join the society and get active. Another option is to postpone the decision and to put it off and to study it in the days or weeks ahead. Or there's a third option, of course, is simply not to be involved and not to be active. But in the process of building an informed electorate, an organized approach is going to be the most effective way for those who are truly concerned and willing to accept the challenge that our civilization and our legacy demands. To those who put off a decision, that usually becomes a decision within itself. But to those of you who feel that perhaps a postponement is the answer, let me ask you, what will you gain tomorrow, or next week, or next month? Will your position with regard to inflation or the loss of national sovereignty be improved? What will it take? Will you have to wait until you lose a son or a daughter in a no-win war before you decide to become involved? Will you have to wait until your son or daughter comes back from college thoroughly committed to Marxist or humanistic principles? Will you have to wait until your savings or your business is destroyed by governmental decree or by inflation? What will it take for you to be involved? For those who feel that they perhaps can do more by not joining the John Birch Society, be honest with yourself. What have you done up until now? If you took out a blank sheet of paper and were to write down the things that you have done on an active, positive basis to bring about less government, a reestablishment of limited government within our constitutional framework, an active program to reestablish sound economic principles, well, I think most of us would have a blank sheet of paper. Well, I know we paid our taxes and perhaps we avoided traffic tickets, but that's not what we're referring to. We're referring to taking those steps in developing an understanding that will have an impact in our society and have an impact in the legislative halls in Washington. This is the challenge that each and every American faces today. Over 200 years ago, our founding fathers responded to that challenge, pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. They kept that pledge for their time and for future generations. We at this time have an opportunity and indeed an obligation to renew that same pledge for our time and for future generations. In my opinion and my advice, the best way to discharge that responsibility in an effective fashion is by being an active member of the John Birch Society. Thank you.